There was a poll that was done online where many filmmakers, including Tarantino, Scorsese, and you, were asked your favorite films of all time. And I think I contacted you around that moment because when I read your top 10, I couldn't believe that you placed at number 1 the same film that I would have placed at number 1, but that probably no one else that I knew would have.
I don't remember what that was. So.
And I'm going to tell you now.
Or shock us.
And some of my students who are here are not going to be surprised, but others might be. It's a relatively obscure Polish film called Ashes and Diamonds, directed by Andrzej Wajda back in 1958.
Fabulous, fabulous, beautiful movie.
And you put that in first place.
Well, you know, it was an extraordinary movie for many, many reasons, and it's less known than it should be, but it's a beauty. But you know, the cinema, which is only, what, 120 years at most, it's almost as though humanity was waiting for the cinema to come, that the technology would make it possible, because when it did come, this rush of masterpieces happened. And even in the first 20, 30 years of the silent film industry, we had Murnau, and we had Pabst, and we had, you know, those 20, 30 years in Germany alone produced 10 masterpieces, not to mention what was to happen. So you know, I really feel that this is because humanity yearned for the cinema. Goethe would have been a great filmmaker because he was both a scientist and a poet, and he just didn't have the camera and the sound, but he would have done that. And he was a playwright and a child of the theater and a puppeteer as a child. So humanity waited for the cinema. When it happened, it just burst out in people ask me all the time, you know, what's your favorite film? I said, you want my favorite 200 films? I can do that. I can't give you a... Kurosawa alone made 9 masterpieces. So the cinema was ready to happen when it did.
Absolutely. And for those who don't know, and Ashes and Diamonds is available on DVD, Criterion Collection. It's a film that's set entirely in one place, one time. It's the end of World War II in Poland, the last day of the war, a small town. And you would think that on the last day of the war, cause for relief and celebration, but the factions within Poland, the Red Army on the one hand and the Polish Home Nationalist Army on the other, are still fighting. And it stars Zbigniew Cybulski, who was this incredible, charismatic.
He was like the James Dean before of the time, and like James Dean, he died young in a train accident, I think.
Yeah, he was running for a train.
Very charismatic, wonderful actor that would have got, you know, it's always a tragedy when these actors die young because you wonder what would they have given. He was a unique, wonderful actor.
Yeah. And he is also the star of another film about which you and I have been in contact lately. I'm writing a book about the films of an even more obscure Polish filmmaker named Wojciech Has, H-A-S. And his best-known work, I guess, in this country is the Saragossa manuscript from the mid-1960s. It's like a trippy film, a story within a story within a story within a story, starring Zbigniew Cybulski. It was the favorite film of Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead. And
who looks like me.
But I know that...
and was my friend.
And Jerry Garcia, apparently, all he wanted was for a print of the film to be donated to the Berkeley Film Archive so that he could see it whenever he damn well felt like it. And you and Martin Scorsese stepped in, and I believe you financed the restoration and the purchase of the print.
Anything to do with finance, I don't remember. But I'm sure we made it possible for him to have it.
And you saw the Saragossa manuscript at that time.
It's a fabulous film.
And do you remember anything about it that struck you?
Well, it's a total trip, you know. It is, as she explains, it's you going and you're getting a story, and then they come upon something and they open it up, and then there's another story that happened before. It's just like the Russian dolls. It's wonderful, a wonderful trip to see.
Yeah, and that's available on DVD too. And one more question related to Polish cinema. There was a clip just now, or a few scenes from Dracula, and you chose as the composer for that film someone whose name means a great deal to me, but probably less to the audience, Wojciech Kilar, K-I-L-A-R. This is the Polish composer who had worked with Wajda on Promised Land, Zanussi. He also scored for Kieślowski, Blind Chance, and for Polanski, The Pianist. What made you choose Wojciech Kilar?
Well, I was very interested that Poland, during its period of during the period of Soviet, one great thing it did is it really subsidized composers. And there are some absolutely great. You know of some of them. But there was a especially great Polish composer named Ludosławski, if I'm pronouncing it right. And his work is just beautiful. And I went to him to do it. And he said to me, he says, well, how many minutes of music do you need in this film you want to do? And I said, well, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes, all in all, maybe a little more or less. He says, well, it takes me a year to write a minute. So I figured, well, I'm barking up the wrong tree here. He was a very petite man. If you don't know his work, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. He's a magnificent composer. And so while I was on that direction of wanting a Polish composer, because Polish contemporary classical music is so, extraordinary, then I was introduced to Kilar and collaborated with him. And he did 2 or 3 other movies. I think mine, or the Dracula movie was his first that he did for an American film.
That's right. And then he did with Polanski The Ninth Gate before The Pianist. But again, Polanski was born in Poland.
Polanski's Polish, so he...
Yeah. And working with him, was that any different from working with the composers here?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit like Ludosławski in that he didn't write a lot of music. He wrote like some great 2 or 3 themes. You see them in every trailer that has come out, that they just use that. But that was it. You got so many notes of music, and we went crazy trying to say, well, we can use it here, and we can go in the mix and eliminate everything but the clarinets and use it there. He had 2 or 3 cues, and that was it. We made the whole movie out of these few cues. In fact, my uncle, Anton, that I spoke about, was the conductor of that.
Wow.
Conducted the recording session.
Well, music seems to be constantly interweaving in your family as well as your work.
Interestingly, my grandfather, Agostino Coppola, was the engineer and designer and machinist who built the Vitaphone, the first machine that made movies talk. And so my little granddaughter, Gia, who made her film recently, who's 28 years old, made Palo Alto, is the 5th generation of the Coppola family in the movie business.
Wow.
And
Respect.
movie business is only 5 generations.
Right, and
You had to
each
be
one
there
had-
at the beginning.
Fantastic.
What I need to do is I need to, in a form, metaphorically, kill myself and be reborn again and have a whole new progression and then turn into another person, and maybe then I can make a first film, this new person. When I love being 50. So I thought, well, when I was 60, I said, well, I'm not 60, I'm 50-10. So now as I sit here, I am 50-26. You can make it short and just call me 26. So I thought what I need to do is I need to start all over again and have a whole new continuity. So then I thought I'm ready to do really something more ambitious, this new me, with a new progression of having arrived at it. And I found myself in an interesting position because a few years ago, everyone was talking about Avatar. And they were saying, this Avatar, this is extraordinary. This is the future of cinema. It's 3D. It's extraordinary, Avatar. And people like Jeffrey Katzenberg and all the executives saying all the movies are going to be 3D. And I'm thinking, wait a second, we had 3D in 1950, Moana Devil with glasses. Why is it different now? I mean, Avatar was excellent, but people don't really like to see 3D. If someone comes along with 3D without glasses, that would be curious. And I say, I don't think the cinema, which is so great, is that the future is because it's going to be 3D. That's not enough. And I said, people will see it. And just like when Hitchcock made Dial M for Murder, they didn't even see. Nowadays, there's a 3D movie, and you have a choice to see it or to see it a little cheaper, and people see it cheaper without the glasses. I always thought 3D, that whole push was just so they could charge more for the tickets. But nonetheless, I think it happened that 3D has sort of relaxed, and the big fact that television could be 3D, which they said, this is different. Now the movies can be on television. I don't know anyone in his house who's ever seen 3D television. It's totally possible. I mean, it's available, but not so many people are talking about it. So I was sure that 3D, no, was not the future of the cinema. That the cinema is too great, too grand. And I thought about that a lot. I said, well, what is the future of the cinema? And I thought it broke down into 3 categories. The first is the script, because the script, be it a script, a play, or a novel, is always being reinvented. You think of the novel, what is it, 400 years old? The earliest novels, Don Quixote and Elective Affinities, speaking of Goethe. But through those 400 years, the novel has gone through incredible transformations, dealing with point of view, from whose point of view is the novel being told. And then we went through the great French, Flaubert, and the great French artists, and it changed Dickens and the serial form, and it changed. And then you got into the really modern times with Joyce and Virginia Woolf. So then the writing itself is the future of the cinema, because they're going to be your great-grandchildren who are going to make cinema. What will that be like? I bet you the scripts themselves, or what, I call it a script, but the writing that precedes all movies is going to be revolutionized. And those very themes, point of view and interior consciousness, things like that, parallel structures. So within the very writing of cinema, which is at the basis of cinema, there's incredible, wonderful work that's going to happen. The second category, I thought, well, look at the documentary. The documentary is a form that's unique because it uses editing and manipulation, even some reshooting, but it's dealing with real, honest-to-goodness people and emotions. Documentary is a very interesting form, and gradually that will grow in ways that we can't imagine, and become more personal and be combined with fiction in ways that we can't even anticipate. And hence, sure enough, last year, Sarah Polley makes Stories People Tell, which is exactly that. It's a documentary, beautiful film. Definitely see it, those of you who haven't seen it. I think it was nominated for Academy Award. This lovely actress, Sarah Polley, and now a filmmaker, makes this documentary that just sweeps you in and then fools you. And suddenly, it's about things I don't want to ruin for you, so personal and so touching that you can't imagine it. So I said, surely that is a whole new form of cinema, the real evolution of the documentary film and the documentary fiction film and mixtures of that. But the third area really fascinated me because in the end, I'm just a boy scientist. And the third area of cinema is the fact that now it's electronic, it's digital. You know that when they talk about television and they talk about movies, that talk is nonsense. There's no difference. Television and movies are the same thing. It's all electronic. The movie theaters that we go to, that this clip was shown in, that's a form of a television projector. That's not a movie projector. Well, if it's and the cameras that shoot it are digital and electronic, and the editing is a computer. Nothing about film technically is the same as it was 30 years ago when we actually had moviolas, or when my great teacher Dorothy Arzner, who was the editor of Stagecoach, cut films, they said, in hand, because when the silent film editors took the film and went like that, they knew the length of time that was. She told me, Francis, if you have a kiss, 3 arms is a very, very long kiss, but 4 arms is a really sexy kiss. I want to make a movie that looks like a movie, that you wouldn't know wasn't a movie, but was performed live. And when you sat in the theater and saw it, you were not seeing canned art, you were seeing a living performance. Well, I think the goal of work is to try to help illuminate contemporary life. So other people who are living and facing the same complex emotional and familial and change can have some clearer vision, and you do that by being the test case. You go through it yourself with your heart in all those institutions that are changing: marriage, religion, education, journalism, and try to shine light so that other people can better go on their adventure. You know, I know, I'm not dumb. I know at age 76 people think that I'm a acclaimed person and stuff, but I tell you, when I was making those films back in the days of even the Godfather and Apocalypse Now, I felt so rejected and so and we got terrible reviews. And I remember I had won 5 Oscars, and nobody would let me make Apocalypse Now. Nobody would give me the money. No actors would be in it. Nobody would say, well, he did an okay job on that. Let him try this. And I took my 5 Oscars and I threw them out the window of my house, and they went down and they go mangled and broken. And my mother went down and picked up the pieces, and she went to the Academy and said, oh, my poor son, the maid was dusting the Oscars. And they were all gnarled and twisted, and she got them replaced, I'm happy to say. But that's how it felt to me. I felt so, the reviews for Apocalypse and the reaction, you know what it's like to get that kind of. So I was always I always felt under the gun and under like a failure and stuff. And it was only years later that Apocalypse gradually started to gain a following. And it's logical. When you're working in a way that maybe rubs the contemporary styles the wrong way, you're not going to get a good response. I mean, we know that in the Belle Epoque, all those beautiful painters, they were not darlings of the French Academy. Manet, Monet, all of those people, the ones who were, we don't even know who they were. So sometimes when you're trying to always look for the other expression, you have to take a lot. And I was always very, very depressed. I didn't know that later on people would like some of this stuff. So the second question, I didn't feel very recognized. So that answers, I think, the second part. The third part was what?
The confluence of social media, online.
Well, that's the fourth part. I know you have something specific in mind, and I am interested in knowing everything. I love to learn. It's my favorite thing. Learning is the one pleasure. Drinking, you get sick and old. Chasing girls, your wife is mad at you and breaks your heart. Eating too much, you get fat. So learning is learning in music is the only thing that you really get pleasure from that doesn't bite you back. The things you get fired for when you're young are the same things you get Lifetime Achievement Awards for when you're old. And it makes sense because you're rubbing the culture the wrong way and they don't like it. But later on, the avant-garde art of the 20s becomes the Knoll furniture of the 60s. So that's what artists partly do. They are the headlights of society, and with their hearts, they're in new territory. I always think of who was that first director who really did the close shot? What guts and what flack he must have taken. Ultimately, movies come down to acting and writing. So it's one of the most important parts. That's why interesting. Have you ever thought that of all the various people who become directors, editors, photographers, assistant directors, writers, no one is more successful than actors. There are more actors who have become great directors than any other field, I think. And that's because they understand acting, that acting is not just simple. It requires a lot of skill, as exemplified by Elia Kazan, who's written about it and who was a master of beautiful performances in films. It's a whole thing working with actors, and you can learn about camera. Orson Welles famously said you can learn everything about filmmaking in a weekend, but you can't learn about acting in a weekend. I mean, Marlon Brando was an extraordinary person to work with, but it was magical. It wasn't. You didn't talk acting stuff with him. He'd come in and go, and that meant where is the shot, and I would work with him through props. I would put little salami out, or I would take a cat and just but not words. I would never talk about acting stuff. He would hate it if I talked about kind of acting talk, but I always worked with props and kind of offered him things that might help him in his. But he was a man of incredible intelligence, aside from acting, just as a human being, what he was interested in, what he talked about, what he observed. He was pretty remarkable. But no, I've had the blessing of working with great actors, and that's always been a big high point for me. I I can't think of any actor that I really didn't get along with. The studio didn't want Brando. And oh, no, I was told by the president of Paramount Pictures, Francis, Marlon Brando will not appear in this movie, and I forbid you, as president of Paramount, to bring his name up again. And at which time I fell on the floor in a faint, and I I did it deliberately, and they said, what? I said, well, if I can't even talk about it, then what kind of director am I? He's, okay, you can talk about it. And then they said to me, finally, okay, we give you 3 conditions for Brando. 1, he does the film for free. 2, he does a screen test. And 3, he puts up $1 million bond, so if any misbehaving on the set happens, he is underwritten. I said, I accept. So that's what I had. I had that he had to do it for nothing. He had to do a screen test. How was I going to get Marlon Brando to do a screen test? And he had to put up a bond. So I went, I talked to Brando. I didn't know Brando, but I think he was pretty down and out. He had been in a film called Queimada, Burn, by Pontecorvo, who made the great Battle of Algiers. And he was like so not in favor that they really thought that if he were in the movie, it would be worse than if an unknown were in the movie. So with Brando, I talked to him knowing he was an actor. I said, you're playing an Italian. Maybe you would like to fool around a little and improvise some things to see if you could get the essence of an Italian. He was only 47 years old, and the character Godfather is in his 60s. So he, on the phone, I think he said yes, he would do that. And I made a date with him to go to his house and shoot a little, and do a little improvisation. So I got there very early with 2 or 3 of my friends from San Francisco, and they were like ninjas. I said, Marlon Brando does not like loud noise. I had heard that. He wears even earplugs. And so I want no one to make noise. We're going to go there and we'll do hand signals like ninja, set up the camera, and be ready for him. So we went to his house there on Mulholland Drive, and it was early. He wasn't up. The maid was there with this beautiful little baby, about 1 or 2 years old, I remember. And we set up our cameras, and I had in those days, little Sony Handycam that I had with me that was new at the time. And sure enough, there's a rumble, and he's going to come, and the door opens, and out walks this beautiful man with long blonde hair and a Japanese robe, and I'm shooting him, and I say good morning, and he was as sharp as a tack. He knew everything. He looked around, he saw the ninjas, and he knew I was filming him. This was, quote, the screen test. But I had brought like some Sazic and some Provolone and some Toscano cigars, and I had put these props around. And he came out and he looked at all this, and he figured out what was going on. And he took his hair and he did his hair up. He had very long blonde hair. And he did it up in a kind of thing himself in the back. And he took shoe polish and he made it black. And then he put on a shirt. And I remember him saying, those guys, the lapel has always got a crooked part, And he did that. He made the lapel and he started to do that. And then he said, he was shot in the throat. In the book, he was shot in the throat. So he talks like that, maybe. And I said, yeah, I'm filming. And then he said, he should look like a bulldog. And he took some Kleenex and he put the Kleenex, like that. And then he started like acting, but not saying anything. And it was in his house. And I'm shooting, and we're all shooting, and he starts going, and the phone rings. His phone rings over here. I don't know who is calling, but he goes, So, at any rate, it was a miraculous transformation. It was the birth of that character. So I figured I was going to play my cards. I wasn't going to show it to the president of Paramount Pictures. I went to New York with the videotape, and I went to the office of Gulf and Western. Charlie Bluthorn was the head of the company, and he was the big boss. And I knocked on his office. I had set up a tape recorder in the conference room near his office. And I said to the secretary, does Mr. Bluthorn have 5 minutes that I could show him something? And he knew me. I mean, Charlie Bluthorn, it was Church of England, but he had a Viennese accent. And He talked like, Francis, what are you doing, you crazy Francis? So he sees me and he says, oh, what is it? I said, Charlie, could I just show you something? And he comes out and he looks, I turn on the video thing and there is this guy with blonde hair, and Charlie Bluthorn said, no, absolutely, that's incredible. And when he said that's incredible, and it was incredible, I knew that if Charlie Bluthorn okayed it, then it would okay, and that's how he got the part. They forgot about the $1 million bond, but they didn't hardly pay him anything. They paid him like $120,000. In fact, and the big thing with Brando, you know, Brando was hired for 3 weeks, $1 million a week, and he showed up, as you know, allegedly very, very big, so I didn't know how to costume him. I said, well, they don't make Green Beret uniforms in size XXXXX. So how am I, how am I going to dress him? And then he wanted to talk, and he's such a genius. He's talking about termites and so on. And meanwhile, I'm thinking, my God, you know, I have 3 weeks, 5-day weeks with him, and his contract was at 5 o'clock he left. And I know what he's doing, the son of a gun. He's going to stall the whole 3 weeks. I'm going to have to pay him another 3 weeks. So finally, I said to him, you know, I think we ought to do Kurtz like it is in the book. In fact, he didn't want the character to be called Kurtz. He wanted it to have a lovely name like Layli. So in the movie, it's all Layli, and we had to dub him into Kurtz because everyone was Layli, because he thought it was Layli. It's like la la. At any rate, I said to him, Marlon, what if we just do it like Kurtz? And you know, Kurtz is described as having almost a skull-like head, bald and stuff. And he said, no, it wouldn't work. So I said, yeah, well, okay. So then on the Friday, which was a week of no shooting, on the Friday morning, he shows up and his head is bald. And I said, Marlon, I thought you said it wouldn't work. He said, well, I lied when I said I read the book. I had never read the book. I read it last night. You know, the secret of life is that when you're old and you're there and you're ready to go and you say, oh, I wish I did this and I wish I did that and I wish I did the other thing. I'm going to say, oh, I got to make movies and I got to see my children make movies and I got to be in the wine business and I got to be in the hotel business and I got to see and I'm going to be so busy saying all the things I got to do that when I die, I won't notice it.